not that unusual when you hear pro-union sentiments inside the city of Seattle. It's very unusual when workers organize to get rid of a union. And that's what happened when Seattle Mariners employees, we're talking about retail employees at the Mariners team stores throughout the Seattle area, when they voted by a 5-1 or 10-1 or let's see, 5-1 margin to get rid of their union representation from the United Food and Commercial Workers. Why did that happen? And how did that happen? Mark Mix is with us from the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation to explain how it all went down. Again, this is highly unusual in the city of Seattle, Mark. Welcome, by the way, to the Commute with Carlson this morning.
John, it's good to be on with you, and thanks for taking a look at this story. And you're right, there is an unusual kind of storyline here, but it's one, unfortunately, that workers across the country, even in Washington state, have to battle when they want to exercise their rights under federal labor policy.
Okay.
And your question about how it happened is really an interesting story, so let's talk about that.
Well, before we get to the how, let's get to the why. What was wrong with this union?
Well, independent-minded employees, they may not all agree on what's wrong with the union, but I don't think they thought the union was giving them a fair shake. And basically, the union was at a disadvantage because instead of getting certified to represent these employees in a secret ballot election where workers could exercise their rights in private to say whether or not they wanted to be part of the union, this was what we call a card check election, where the union goes around to employees, puts a small piece of paper in front of them and says, hey, are you interested in more pay or better benefits? And if you sign this card, we'll get it for you. Well, that card is tantamount to a yes vote for the union. And once they gathered a majority plus one of those cards, they presented the Mariners management with them. And the Mariners management said, okay, the union represents all these employees. So
wait a minute. Stop there. For our listeners that might be confused, why wouldn't you, at that point, call an election with secret ballots? Hey, we have 50% plus one employees have signified their openness to a union. We're now going to have an election to see if that's how everyone really feels, because it's one thing to say you want a union on a secret ballot. It's another thing when you've got two people standing in front of you showing you this card, said, why don't you sign this card and join the team here?
That's exactly right. And I couldn't describe it any better, John, but that's exactly right. And you'd think that the union would want to have a secret ballot election, but they know when workers get a choice to basically have their say in private where they can't be seen or can't be identified, unions' officials' success rate is very low in those types of elections. So they had proposed legislation again and again and again to do away with the secret ballot election and use this card check mechanism as the primary means of certifying a union to represent every employee in a bargaining unit.
How long had the union represented Seattle Mariners retail employees?
Yeah, well, they started back the card check was conducted back in October of 2022.
Okay.
And the union members, the workers came back in April of 2022 and petitioned for an election. And under the current rule, which is an interesting story, and this is the how of it, these workers would have been blocked from having a secret ballot election for at least 12 months because there is this non-statutory contract. Well, there is a statutory contract bar, but it would have blocked them from having an election. But the fact that they were unionized by card check gave them a little bit of a window to basically say, you know what? We would like to request a secret ballot, and that's what the employees did. They requested this election saying, hey, we were organized by card check. We would like to have a secret ballot election to prove that the union has a majority here. The union filed a brief appealing or opposing that vote, and it went to the National Labor Relations Board regional office in Seattle. And interestingly enough, the regional director ruled that the workers could get a vote based on a case that we won way back in 2007 called Dana Corp, which said that if workers were organized by card check without a secret ballot, they would have a 45-day window to request a secret ballot election. Well, the employer and the union, John, in this case, didn't notify the employees that they had this right. They just said, okay, the union's in, we're going to do it. And so we argued on behalf of these employees that they should get a secret ballot election based on an NLRB rule from 2019 that basically said, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't understand why these workers were deprived of a ballot election in the first place. This really seems like the rules were stacked in favor of the union representing the workers, whether the workers really wanted it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why card check is so important to union officials and why they push for it. And there's a bill in Congress right now that has 213 House sponsors and 47 Senate sponsors that would make this card check process kind of the formal way for union certification. They know that when workers can basically go behind a curtain and vote yes or no based on what they believe, as opposed to your point, John, two people showing up on their front porch at 10 o'clock at night and saying, hey, you ought to sign this card. There's a big difference there in kind of how we execute democratic...
That's not how elections happen in a free republic.
Exactly. And so this is a good victory for them. As you mentioned, the vote was 50-9. So it's pretty clear the union didn't have a majority of these workers. For whatever reason, the workers decided when they were given a chance to vote in secret and respect their privacy, they voted what they thought was in their best interest, and that was to see the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 3000 thrown out of their workplace.
So the workers didn't just vote to decline union representation. The 50-9, that's a, hey, get the hell out of here mandate.
Yeah, pretty clear. That's right. Exactly. And, we had another story.
Well, what has happened since?
Yeah. Well, the union or the NLRB has certified that, and the union will no longer represent these employees. And basically on the same day, we had another story from Seattle for Storyville Coffee, where the workers there filed a petition to decertify the union, to throw out the same local, United Food and Commercial Workers Local 3000. And instead of having a vote, the union just walked away. They basically said, we're no longer interested in representing these employees. And so they left that business as well and left those employees as well.
Here's my position. Again, my guest is Mark Mix, National Right to Work Foundation. I'm not anti-union. I've belonged to unions before. I once voluntarily joined a union I didn't have to join because I believed they were giving good representation. That's what it's all about. Free association, being allowed to join a union if you think that they will give you better representation. I have no problem with people being union members or deciding to join a union or deciding to form a union. But I also believe in very simple, clear, and fair rules for how joining a union or how forming a union should work. And this process was not fair to the employees. But when someone walks up to you with a card, a couple of people say, hey, why don't you sign this card so we can all have fair representation? Other people have signed. How about you signing as well? That's not an election. That's peer pressure or outright pressure. That's not how free and fair elections are supposed to work in the United States of America. Final word, Mr. Mix.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, John. Voluntary unionism is the secret to rebuilding the union movement in America. Compulsion will not achieve that goal. When you force people or intimidate people or coerce people, you're going to be inherently weaker than you would be if, under your theory, and that is correct theory, that workers join voluntarily and want to amplify their voice at their choice, not someone else's.
And by the way, here, I can give you lots of reasons why card check is a wrong way to conduct, quote, an election. What's the argument against a secret ballot? What's the argument
John,
against that?
You tell me. You tell me. I don't know.
Because card check, this card check system they want to use is being used as a replacement for a secret ballot. Why is card check an improvement in democracy over a secret ballot?
Yeah, the union officials intimate that because employers have so much power in the workplace that the balance is out of skew, and so workers have to have another mechanism as opposed to allowing the employer to have any role at all.
Well,
frankly,
but that's my point. My point is, if you've got an abusive employer, thank God you've got a secret ballot where you and your fellow employees can strike out against an abusive employer.
That's exactly right. The secret ballots are the best way to conduct this business, but yet the union officials don't want to do it, and we're continuing to protect workers that do. We help these employees at the Seattle Mariners T-Mobile Park and their other outlets, and we help the people at Storyville Coffee to exercise their rights under the law, and it works. And we're willing to help any employee anytime when they want to exercise their rights in the American workplace.
Yeah. Again, I'm not anti-union. I am very much pro-free and fair elections, and that means the secret ballot. That means your vote belongs to you. It doesn't belong to a group or a committee. What you've just described can easily devolve into bullying. And that's not what elections are supposed to be about in this country. All right, Mr. Mix, Mark Mix, National Right to Work Foundation. Thank you for joining me here on the John Carlson Show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate the opportunity.